Hello. Today we are for a new interview. Today we interview Master Danny Schultz from Johannesburg. Hello.
Hello, nice to be here. Nice to see you all.
How are you?
Doing pretty good, man. Can't complain.
That's awesome. Can you start introducing yourself, your Kung Fu background, your martial arts background?
Okay. So basically I'm a martial arts weirdo. I've been doing it most of my life. And I started, my starting is not exactly the most Kung Fu-esque. Basically, I was a youngster and my parents were like, hey, all you do is sit around and play video games all day. You need to go do something. So they gave me an ultimatum, which was like, okay, you can do ballet with your sister, or you can do this martial arts thing that just popped up. So I thought it was pretty obvious. I went for the ballet. No, I just went for the martial arts. So that was a karate, and that was my first introduction to martial arts when I was a youngster. And then more into my teenage years, I got into the Chinese arts, from which I've been all ever since then. So I started in a Northern Shaolin system, as well as a Yang Taiji system. And then I moved on to my second teacher, who taught Hung Gar, Northern Shaolin, and a Yang style Taiji. And then from there, I went on to meet my current teacher, Shifu Neil Ripski, and he's been teaching me the Ma family system of Kung Fu, and as well as Taijiquan, both Yang and Chen style, Xinyiliuhe, xingyi, and Baguazhang. And I've also run into several masters of different arts, some with Baguazhang, xingyi, Taiji. I also met a Wudang priest for some seminars as well, and just some people here and there, but I've been mostly with my teacher, Shifu Neil Ripski, and practicing his arts.
As far as I know, your Shifu teaches Ma family style. Can you tell us more about the Ma family style history and how the system is, like the methodology of the system?
Sure thing. So basically, historically, it was a family that lived near Shaolin Temple. So it was in Dengfeng, China. And basically, it was like a Kung Fu epicenter there at the time. So like their family systems, there were Shaolin systems and subsystems. And basically, anywhere you go, there's like a Kung Fu school. So the Ma family basically were like, they raised horses, as well as they like did like bodyguard work and such. And they really loved to go and see other styles. So the way that our art kind of developed was that they would have youngsters go into other schools, learn some stuff, bring it back, and then add it to the system. As well as during the burning downs of the Shaolin Temple, some of the Shaolin monks were obviously fleeing from there, fleeing for persecution. So they would give them refuge in exchange for martial arts knowledge. So essentially, they gathered bunches of different systems all together, and they collected it in the Ma family. And the way that our martial arts kind of works is that each of these systems and subsystems are kind of like shadows. And these shadows create the art, which is the Ma system. So there's examples of like tiger style, mantis style, drunken boxing, longfist, and all these different shadows make up the system. Actually, our system is kind of like a proto-Bagua before historically Baguazhang actually became a thing. So it's like they were kind of going for the same idea. The idea is that they used the Bagua as like a diagram to organize their system. So with each gua in Baguazhang represents a change, and each palm change represents one of those guas. So you can say the heaven change is all about all the three yang lines, right? So they have the three lines between broken and solid lines being yang lines and broken lines being yin lines. So yang, the triple yang is heaven. So something like that is the idea that everything is just smashing through. You're too powerful to be beaten. Whereas something, say, like the earth gua, which is the opposite, all three yin lines, is something more like you're disappearing. You're becoming like smoke. So they took the different systems and they put them each into the guas, much in the same way that Baguazhang used the palm changes to represent them. So we have, like, say, dragon in the heaven gua, and then we have Taiji in the earth gua, and then they would put the systems into the different guas to organize it. And basically Basically, then the sorry, go ahead.
Okay, just one question. So, for example, nowadays the methodology of teaching, students usually learn the whole, like the whole Bagua, or they go to some specific substyles. Like you can pick, oh, I want to learn the drinking method, this method, or you must learn the whole. How is it divided this way?
That's what I think the neat part of the system is. It's kind of like the way that it's taught in our curriculum currently is that you learn like a subset of skills and foundations, which is like same throughout all of it, right? So you learn your stances, you learn your techniques, you learn your kicks, you learn how to step, you learn how to move, you learn how to fight. And then you kind of put these systems into the style afterwards. So basically, it's what you first need, and then eventually you'll complete the system. So for someone, it may be that mantis may benefit them more. So they'll learn the foundations, then they'll learn mantis, and they'll learn the foundations in the style of mantis. So then they'll relearn the whole curriculum as the mantis and the methodology of the mantis. And then once you get through the curriculum to the black sash stage, at least the way we have in our curriculum, you learn how to represent each one of the styles. So eventually you'll learn all of them, and then all of them create the whole. But at first you start with one. And basically how we pick it is what would benefit the person. So is the person, like, say, unconfident? So basically to help unconfidence, you need to give them something to be confident in, right? So something that they already know that they can get good at decently enough in a quick time so they can build their confidence and then grow as a person. So for one student that my teacher had, she was very small and frail, and she kind of had like a inwards type of like keep away kind of vibe to her. So mantis represents that very much in its body type. It's very inwards, sucking inwards. So he gave her that, and then she was like phenomenal after that, beating up many of the guys. So that gave her the confidence that she needed, and then she started to learn styles after that. And then say another person may come in, maybe they have a cocky attitude, maybe they need to be put down a peg or something. So somebody with like a strong body type typically wouldn't be built for something like monkey style, which is very much a lot of acrobatics and jumping around. But we may give it to them because they need to have their cups emptied, as it were. They need to realize that they don't know everything. And then once they do realize that they don't know everything, then they become more receptive to everything else. So then they can complete the system afterwards. So it's based on the student, which one we give first. But then eventually we fill in the guas by going through all the different systems and subsystems.
I see. That's very interesting and a little bit different from what we usually see, right?
Yeah. It's both unique and not unique at the same time, I find. Because like it's the first one that I've met that kind of specified that this is what it's doing. But I've seen in the systems that I learned previously, like ever since then, that my eyes have been opened, I can see it now. In styles like Hungar, for instance, they have the 5 animals, right? They have the crane, the tiger, the leopard, snake, and frick, I'm blanking already. Oh well. Crane, tiger, snake, leopard, and oh, doesn't matter. But they have these different systems inside of it, which you could consider subsystems. And then, oh, and dragon, of course. How can I forget dragon? But each of these animals, as it were, is not just a methodology of fighting. It is, but it's also a way of changing how you look at things. So a tiger, which Hungar is primarily a tiger art, it becomes very easy to see it based on the way that Hungar works. It's very much like I'm stalking, I'm hunting, I'm mowing things over, I'm leaping on them, I'm eating, right? But then a snake, it's also a predator, but it has to go about things differently. It's not as big as a tiger. It can't take advantage of its weight like a tiger can. So it has to be sly. It has to sneak in. Whereas something, again, like a crane, it has to move out of the way. It has to avoid, it has to fly. So it's all about movement. So some of the animals are more about using heaviness. Some of them are more about twining movements. Some of them are more about movements. It's all trying to balance itself in a way. And that's really what the Ma family taught me, is that all systems try to balance themselves in a way if you look down the rabbit hole deep enough. Because there's no system that I can find that doesn't have a hole somewhere. But each system will try to fill that hole if they realize it, which is, I think, the strength of the Ma system is it gives you all these different systems to be like, hey, this system has holes, this system has holes, this system has holes. But these systems, they relate to those holes. They fill in those gaps, right?
Yeah, I agree. The family that I learned mantis, it's Taijiquan Tonglong and Liuhe Tonglong. Like, people usually teach the Taijiquan Tonglong first because of Liuhe is so difficult. So one needs a foundation to reach that level. You can't just be a beginner and start it. It's really crazy and difficult.
Right. Got to build a foundation first.
Yeah,
then fill in the gap as we go.
And I got really interested in the knowing more about the drunken system, because usually the most drunken techniques we see are just like one set in a style or like move influenced, and this is a traditional drunken style. Can you tell me a little bit more about it? Because for me, it was like the first time I hear about a only system of drunken style. And how can people know, like, watching how it's the traditional drunken system and the modern one, like what the difference?
I knew I wouldn't escape this interview without talking about drunken boxing. Considering it was what made my teacher kind of gave him his name, and then it's my favorite style what drew me to him. So obviously I wasn't going to escape this without talking about drunken boxing. But basically, drunken boxing, it's kind of both a style and not a style in the same method. So let me start with this. So drunken boxing is always seen as athletic, acrobatic, and it's advanced because of those things, because of the acrobatics of it. But actually, that's not why it's an advanced system of martial arts. And neither is it advanced system of martial arts because all the attacks come from an unexpected angle. Those things happen, but it's not why it's considered advanced. So the difference between modern and traditional Zui Chuan is the martial arts side of it. So the modern is actually based more on wushu, where it's more of a dance and a contemporary dance than it is a martial art. Unfortunately, most of the drunken boxing known today is either that or it's traditional martial arts that lost its fangs because of, well, it's such an abstract martial art, to be quite frank, that I'd be surprised if someone was able to re-understand it today. But the style of drunken boxing is not meant to be a style that you learn by itself, but it's meant to be a style you learn after you've already mastered the system. It's actually meant to take you beyond into the advanced stages of martial arts because of its methodology. So drunken boxing is about taking your martial arts where it is and taking it to its actual theoretical limit and then training in that space. So we may learn principles in other styles, say for instance, Taiji, we must keep the pole of Taiji, keep verticality in order to keep upwards force, right? Well, drunken boxing is like, okay, but can I have that while I'm all bent over and out of shape like this? And another style may say, okay, I must make my legs like springs. Okay, but like, now how can we make springs in this position, in that position, in that position? It's about taking everything to its theoretical limit, to the space where it's about to break, where the rules and the principles are actually going to break, and then dial it back just one notch, and then train in that space until eventually you can have just as much power in that space than you would in the theoretical orthodox foundational space that you'd be in your other practice. Because essentially, the way that my teacher put it is that the rules are meant to teach you the foundations, but eventually the rules become a prison. And you can see many people like always arguing on the internet, okay, this is the rules, and if you're breaking this rule, then you're not practicing martial arts, right? Drunken boxing is like, okay, I'm gonna play with that rule until it breaks, and then I'll train in the space just below that until the point where everybody else would be like, oh, he's absolutely breaking the rule, but he's not breaking the rule. He still has power there. It still works. If the rule is there and it limits the practitioner, then it's no longer acceptable to be adhering to the rule. The rules are there to teach us a principle. And once the principle is learned, the rule doesn't apply anymore. That's what drunken boxing is trying to teach. It's not about the rules, it's about the principle and learning effective, efficient movement, right? So I may do something different than I did before, but as long as my movement is efficient and I still have the power, then it's good, right? As long as I'm moving the 6 harmonies, as long as I'm moving my core, as long as I'm still getting power out in weird positions, as long as that's still happening, then it's good boxing. And that's essentially what drunken boxing is it's the advanced stage of martial arts that every martial art tries to get, but essentially being like, okay, I'm going to just give you the roadmap to what you're doing in our theoretics, right? You can see Xingyi and then Yi-Tren, right? Yi-Tren actually was created as like the advanced stage of Xingyi, or at least it developed that way. It wasn't meant to be a style that you just learned and then practiced. It was meant to be like, okay, now that you have your foundations, now let's play with theoretics and break the rules until they're about to break, and then dial it back one notch and train that space. It's essentially that kind of idea. It's more or less a style than is a methodology, but it also is a style.
I see. Yes, I asked this because usually I see styles that have 1 set or 2 sets of drunken boxing, like Hong Kong mantis, Eagle Claw. They usually are really acrobatics, and people like really advanced people learn it, and they are not young anymore when they learn it. So it's always a challenge, right? Because okay, you are learning something that is considered advanced, but at the same time it's really acrobatic, and probably you don't have the body anymore to do this kind of movements, you know. That's why I ask it, because I always this thing was always in my mind, because I thought, okay, if you want to teach like advanced physical abilities, like external abilities, you should teach it first, not like the last thing you teach. But this you told gives more insight to think about. Oh, okay, it's like more conceptual, advanced thing, not only physical.
Yeah, the physical movements are more to express what's going on up here. It's more about the mental stage, because that's really the bounding box that we're trying to break here with drunken. It's both trying to break you physically and mentally. It breaks you physically in the idea that I'm trained to move in this way, I'm trained to be structured like this. Okay, now let's break that and move in a different way. So you can learn that structure isn't limited to that, what we learned, but it's all of this. And then breaking the idea of in our head that we have to adhere, but rather the adherence isn't to the rule, but the principle itself. And the principle can be expressed so many different ways, not just a single linear way that we learn in one system versus one other system. They're all expressions of the principles, all the different styles, mantis, tiger, dragon, drunken boxing, and longfist. They're all expressions of the same thing, but they just go about it a little bit differently. And then drunken boxing is like, they're all right. They're all differing in their points of view, but they're all right. They're all looking at the core principles. So it's just trying to remove the style, if you will, and say, this is the principle. This is what makes it all work.
And what about like, as my family teach different styles in the system, we usually see people practicing more like oh, I practice more internal arts, I practice more external arts. How is like my family opinion that I don't agree with this division of internal versus external sometimes, but
Yeah.
sometimes I understand what people say about it,
Yeah.
But what's your opinion about it?
So internal versus external is a huge topic that everyone likes to argue about. Very wrongly, unfortunately. So external internal is a way of classifying martial arts into those categories was actually something that Sun Wukong did, but it wasn't for the reason that many of us think today. Sun Wukong was essentially saying, okay, styles that have their methods organized in this way is internal. Styles that have their methods organized in this way is external. Essentially, it works as a yin yang to each other. So internal styles typically work on internal movements, physical, like moving the body first rather than just the arms, right? Trying to get the whole mechanism working. And then it's like, cool, now that we have this cool mechanism, let's work on the fighting aspect. Let's work on the external side of it. So it's moving from the internal, literally inside my body, to the external where my opponent is. And then external martial arts were supposed to be the ones that's like, cool, I need to fight right away. So I'm going to work on fighting the dude first. And then as over time, I'll influence with body mechanics and improve with that over time. So it's really just meant to be these ones work this way to that way, and this ones work this way to that way.
Yeah,
They're never meant to be that this is only internal or this is only external. They're all supposed to do each other.
yeah,
Which
I
is
agree with you in this. It's like it's really the yin yang cycle. If you see like the high of the yang is yin and the high of yin is yang. So yeah, I would say that uh, for example, the internal people start learning the soft skills to reach its peak on the harder, the fajin, the expression of it. And yeah, the external would start like more in this physical aspect, and in the end, they should like release more in this more internal part. Even Honga with the Iron Eye set and all this stuff. I agree with you.
absolutely. And also, there's drunken boxing in Hung Gar too. There's
Yes.
the drunken monk move, right? Which is really supposed to be the move that you're like, okay, now let's think about things differently within Hung Gar itself. It's the part that's supposed to soften you up. Whereas Hung Gar is very hard, very looked at as external art. The drunken boxing is there to be like, okay, now look at it this way. Look at the soft side. Be soft. Be drunk.
You know that I always thought it can be my mistake, okay, that these sets in many systems, like almost every style has a drunken set.
Mm-hmm.
They were like influenced by movies, or not even movies, just like performance, yes, Chinese opera. Because I think, especially not only Hong Kong but all over China, masters like to pick up things that are good to promote the kung fu. Oh, like drunk boxing is in the movies; it's quite popular. Oh, we have it too. What do you think about it?
Well, actually, I've seen a bunch of systems that, like you said, include a drunken set in them. And the way I see it is that they were doing the same thing too. It was trying to break the methodology of their system. But because it's just a singular form, they weren't trying to be like, okay, now you're a drunken boxer. Now you do the drunken style. Rather, it was just trying to be like, okay, you've learned Chole foot for your whole life now. Now let's soften up and let's look at the drunken side of it. And then let's influence your Chole foot through that. It was meant to be a enhancement of the system, not a now you're this guy or now you're that guy. It was really, and that's again why I think most systems just have a form, because it was supposed to teach them something for their other things. What else they were learning?
And
of course, we get the Hong Kong ones where, or not the Hong Kong ones, but the ones who were just like, oh, we also do drunken boxing like that.
yeah, and I don't see any problem on this, on adding these things even for like performance marketing. I don't see problem. I just see that sometimes this happens.
Right.
And what about, like, I see in your posts you talk a lot of like uh, about the philosophy and even like this concept of letting go of the Buddhism. How do you relate it to the your martial arts training, your view?
So letting go is something that I honestly didn't even know until in the recent years, because it was kind of like a epiphany that my teacher had. So I am part of the 18 Lohan system that my teacher teaches, and that Sifu Chen Qiming, my Qigong, teaches as well. And 18 Lohan is one of the Qigongs like that you hear, Yijin Jing, Shui Jing, and then Shibasho Lohan Zhang. It's one of the 3 Qigongs that supposedly Damo had taught at the Shaolin temple. Of course, there's many variants of it today. So you see people like with their own variants of it, and ours is kind of unique in a way, but it's because it went through Tibet as the Shaolin temple had burned down. So ours was kept by the Tibetans and passed down to us. So 18 Lohan is both a system of a Qigong system as well as a martial art, but it's also a system of Buddhism. And this is where like a lot of my ideas got flipped on its head. It's not that you have to be a Buddhist to learn martial arts, but studying Buddhism actually really helps with martial arts, because a lot of them are based around that, and Taoism too, with Taoist martial arts. So in Buddhism, there's the Four Noble Truths, all basically summarizing the idea that in the world there is suffering, and suffering is caused by attachments. And the idea that if we can let go of these attachments, we don't have to suffer anymore. So the idea of letting go of attachments, that's where this theory of letting go happens. So if you look at the systems, letting go is actually throughout the whole system. In order to do a thing, you have to let go of it first. If I want to be super strong and punch hard and punch fast, I have to not be trying to punch hard or fast. Because when people typically try hard to punch hard or fast, they tense their muscles and they try to go as fast as they can or as hard as they can. But in doing so, they actually tense a lot of muscles that are counter to the movement that they're doing. Like if I'm extending my arm, right? This is a tricep motion, just doing this. The bicep contracts, but many people tense their bicep when they do a punch, which means that they're actually hitting the brakes as they're hitting the gas at the same time. So the idea of getting soft and letting go of the idea that I need to be powerful is actually what's going to let happen the power and the speed. The more I relax, the faster I'll go, because I'm not inhibiting my movement. Because of that, more power, because force times space, acceleration, all that. So the more I let go, the more I'll have. If I want to have good rooting comes from having structure and then sinking the center of gravity. And sinking the center of gravity comes from relaxing. So the center of gravity can be relaxed and weighed downwards. So to have good root, I need to let go, relax, soften. And anything you can look at is through this process. In order to achieve something, you need to let go of the idea that I need it. And then it will come on its own, which really is what made martial arts work for me, in a way. My teacher was always just like, you need to let go more. You need to relax. You need to let go. And I'm just like, I'm trying really hard. He's like, no, you're not getting it. You need to stop trying. Just do. Do or do not. Do. There is no try. We go back to Yoda now. The more you attach to something, the more it will cause you suffering. So you need to let go and let it happen instead. Trust the practice. Keep practicing. Practice the principles, but don't attach to the idea that I need this. Let it go, and it will come back to you.
Okay, one moment. Hello, we had some apps problems, but we are back. So I would like to know more about like different philosophies when training Kung Fu, when it's a more Buddhist martial art and more like a Taoist or even Confucianist martial art in your point of view.
Okay. So admittedly, I know more about Buddhism than Taoism, but I do know a little bit of both. So for Buddhism, because essentially like all these martial arts, they were created around these different philosophies, right? So it's only obvious that they would be influenced by them as well, at least in their creation. So with Buddhism, the idea is, in short, there's the Four Noble Truths, which sum up essentially there's suffering in the world. And with suffering, it's caused by attachments. So if I attach to something and I lose it, it will cause me suffering. Or if that attachment that I have will also cause me suffering. So if I attach to my relative and they're going through a rough time, it will cause me to be sad and have suffering because I'm attached to them. Or if I have a very sentimental object that I attach to and then I lose it, it will cause me suffering. So essentially it's all summed up as attachments cause suffering. So the way to get rid of suffering is to let go of attachments. So with martial arts, the idea of letting go becomes very important. So it's like a very advanced idea, at least it was for me when I learned it, but it's also prevalent throughout all levels of martial arts. The more you let go, the less it will cause you suffering. So say I want to punch really fast or hit very hard. Many people will try to bulk up, hit hard, try to punch fast. But many of them do so in not realizing that they could actually be detrimenting their own martial arts. So say I'm punching. So many people will tighten their muscles as they punch, which will inhibit movement, because the more that you tighten a muscle, the less it can contract easily, which will result in not moving very fast at all. As well, most people when they hit, they tend to tense their bicep. So when they punch, they tense their bicep. But the bicep is actually for contraction, whereas the tricep is for extension. So essentially, by tensing the bicep and punching, I'm putting my pedal to the metal and I'm also hitting on the brakes at the same time. So by letting go, by softening, by relaxing the muscles that are counter to what I'm doing, then I will be able to hit harder or faster. The more that I can let go of, the less it will cause me suffering. Rooting comes from structure and from relaxing, because I need to have a solid structure to take the force. And I also need to soften in order to let the force come downwards and lower my center of gravity. To lower your center of gravity, you need to relax. Essentially, because if you hold a baby when it's awake versus when it's asleep, it's perceived as heavier, even though it technically doesn't weigh anymore. But it's because it's all dead weight rather than it carrying itself. So the more I relax, the more weight becomes available to me. So that weight then translates into the punch. So the more I can let go of trying to be strong, the more power will actually come out, and the more suffering for my opponent that will come out in the meantime. So the more you can let go of in martial arts. So for me, it was very difficult because my teacher's just like, you need to let go. You need to not try so hard. It's like, I'm trying to do that. Like, no, you don't get it. Stop trying. Stop trying to do it. Just do it. So I needed to let go, and because the attachment to trying to do the thing that he was asking me to do was actually what was holding me back from doing what he was asking me to do. It comes more from letting go and letting the work take its course, doing the foundations, doing what your teacher asks you to do, trusting in the work that's going to be done, and then the development will happen as a result of not getting in our own way. And this happens both physically and mentally. So there's many blockages that happen mentally across many journeys, right? So I may say, go ahead and get a black belt, right? And now all of a sudden I'm a big shot black belt. Now my mind has changed. I'm no longer thinking like a beginner. I'm now thinking like I know some stuff, so I'm pretty good. But this also shuts me off to learning from what's around me. Because the more that I think of myself as high and mighty, the less I think of everything else in relation to me. And thus, the less I subconsciously might think that I can learn from everything. When really, you can learn from anything. A teacher, a student, anyone. A tree. You can learn from a tree. If you're able to let go of our own egos enough to be like, hey, I can learn something from you, even though we can't physically talk. It's the idea that if I can let go of my own ego, then it will not get in the way of my forward progress. So attachments cause suffering. If you're plateauing, there's probably something that needs to be fixed regarding letting go of suffer or letting go of our attachments. Now, as far as Taoist thought, or Buddhism, I like to look at is a way of looking at the self by looking at the self. And then after you find yourself, you look outwards and you can see, okay, this is how I relate to the world. This is how I can help the world. But it's only after I've been doing a lot of work on myself for a long time. Taoist is more, tends to be the opposite. Okay, let me observe nature. Let me observe this tree. How does this tree live just like I do? Because it's a living creature just like I am. What's really the difference? We're all just dust and empty space, as Buddhism would put it, which really translates to we're atoms and empty space. They knew about atoms before we discovered atoms. So Taoist is like, okay, let me look at all this stuff. Let me look at this tree. Let me look at the sky. Let me look at the clouds passing by. Now, how do I relate to that? How do I fit in this ecosystem? So it's a sense, whereas Buddhism is about finding the self and then looking outwards, Taoism is more about finding the self by looking around us in order to find ourselves. It's an outwards to work inwards method. So for me, there was one Qigong that I did, which sounds crazy unless you actually do it. It's I think Tianshan Qigong, I think that's the name. But it's essentially a Qigong that you do during the summer solstice. You'll do during the longest daylight of the year. And essentially, you'll be there from sunup to sundown. I've done this once, where it's like very slow Qigong. Like if you like see Taiji moving very slowly, it's like 100 times slower than that. You're trying to move very, 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 very slowly. So by moving very, 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 very slowly, you'll actually observe what my teacher said to be the passage of time. So as we're doing this Qigong, we're looking in the sky, we're looking at the clouds. So the clouds, as we look at them, move very slowly. But if we can slow down our movements, essentially we'll slow down our perception of how fast things move. So as I become slower, the things around me will be perceived as faster because I'm moving so slow. It's just about changing the perspective. So by looking at this, essentially, when I started, clouds were moving very slowly. When I finished, clouds were flying by, like left and right. I'm like, holy crap, what's going on? That's when I realized passage of time can be observed. Not in the concept of time, but like more in the idea that everything moves at a typical speed. And if I can observe that, I can choose to match that speed. In a conflict, this can be perceived as like, okay, my opponent moves this fast. In order for me to block his attacks, I need to clock in at his speed so that if I'm going too fast, my block will miss because I timed it poorly. Or if I'm too slow, it will hit me in the face anyway. I'll miss the block. But if I can match his speed, then I'll be able to block and then maybe speed up for my hit. But I need to be able to match that perspective that my opponent has. Being able to essentially change your perspective to meet the situation. So to one perspective, somebody may have a perspective that they want to enforce upon you. And then you may be like, well, I have a perspective I want to force upon you. And then we get into argument and then it becomes brawn against brawn. Or you can essentially match their perspective, be like, okay, I can see where you're coming from, which is really how fighting works in another way. Because if I want to assert my technique and the opponent wants to assert their technique, it's the Taiji double heavy thing, right? Where we are fighting yang against yang, or yin against yin, where essentially we're using strength on strength. And that's the big no-no in Taiji. Big no-no in all martial arts. Don't try to overstrength them. Try to out-finesse them. So the idea is that I need to be perceptive enough to understand the perception of my opponent. I need to understand their technique as it comes in. I need to be accepting of it and be willing to give up my perspective in order to deal with the opponent. Because otherwise, I'm just going to try and punch him and he's going to punch me and we're going to have this anime moment where we're both punching each other in the face at the same time. But I need to instead read the situation and then respond appropriately instead of trying to assert myself on the situation. So being able to change your perspective changes how martial arts, how it all works. So this is one way that the Taoist method would work, because this is a Taoist Qigong actually. If I can learn how to change my perspective, then it changes the way that I move in my body. I can learn how to adapt to the situation rather than trying to assert myself.
Very, very good. I am like a little bit curious, is like how do you teach usually Western people like these concepts and even like philosophical religious things? I ask you this because here in Brazil we have like a strong Catholic and new Catholic groups of, and teaching traditional Kung Fu here can be tough in this part because, for example, many people don't like bowing to ancestors and bowing to people and these basic rituals that we have in Chinese culture. And how is that for you? How do you see this in your teaching daily?
I've had very similar experiences, my friend. Actually, I grew up Christian, still Christian myself, which some people have a hard time understanding that because they say, you talk about Buddhism and Taoism, how do you relate? Well, first of all, Buddhism and Taoism, for the most part, are more a philosophy than it is a religion. It is a religion to some, but for the most part, I see it as a philosophy, a way of looking at things. And I don't see it as a way of interfering with Christianity at all, really, to be true. It more comes from the perspective of the person who's observing what we're doing, right? They may look at it and be like, oh, it's a religion, it's opposite of what we teach, blah, blah, blah. It's the devil or whatever. But over my years of experience with it, and over my years of being spoon-fed little bits over time, I've really started to understand how they're not really conflicting things, honestly. And that's how I would say how it would be good to teach them. Spoon-fed, a little bit at a time. Because if you just come up to somebody who's Christian and be like, hey, you want to learn about Buddhism? They're going to be like, no. No, what the crap? So instead, with my teaching, in the same way that I teach the things that are necessary to teach them versus the things that they want me to teach them or the things that are sparkly and shiny, right? You give them a little bit of what they need. You give them 90% of what they want and then 10% of what they need. So they come in, they were like, oh, I love swords. They're big and shiny and sharp. I love them. I want to learn swords. Okay, cool. Now I'll give you sword, but as I'm teaching you these sword techniques, I'm going to teach you stances at the same time. So as you're correcting their sword techniques, you'll be like, okay, relax. No, form your leg this way instead of that way, right? Work on their stance while they're all distracted with the sword. And then little by little, you begin to change the ratio. Because the more that you do this, the more that they'll trust you. Because at first they'll be like, no, I don't trust you. You haven't proven me anything yet. But the more that you can give them that will excite them, and the more that you can give and show them that's like, hey, I know what's good for you, then the more they'll be left, or the less they'll be resistant to what you have to teach them. So what was 90% and 10% now becomes 80% and 20%, then 70% and 30%, until eventually you're just giving them what they need. And then they'll accept it because they trust you. So don't go up to somebody and be like, hey, want to learn about Buddhism? When they're obviously Christians and they won't be about it, but rather give them a little bit. So we'll talk about letting go, right? So as I'm training them in techniques, I'll be like, okay, you need to let go more. You're tensing too much. You need to let go of that because you're not getting the strength that you think you do. So the more that we're teaching about letting go, the more we're teaching a very common or a very important principle of Buddhism. So you just essentially change the ratio over time until eventually be like, hey, by the way, you've been learning Buddhism this whole time. Did you realize that? So did you see that these little things are not actually different from what you believe? So the more that you can get them to trust you by giving them what they want, the more they'll trust you to give them what they need. The things that will improve them as a person, the things that will help them, right? If it's for one person, they need to exercise, get better health, they'll trust you. If they need to work on themselves because they're not quite their best selves, they'll trust you, but only because you've earned their trust.
And in this sense, what do you think people look for nowadays when they look for Kung Fu or even Chinese martial arts in general?
That's an interesting one, because most people, when they look for martial arts in general, they're not looking for Kung Fu anymore, because we're starting to get a bad rap, unfortunately, with MMA and all that, all the showings. And to be truthful, they're right in a lot of ways, because many Kung Fu people only practice forms, and it's no surprise when they don't practice sparring and they can't fight, right? So most people, when they're looking for Kung Fu, most of them I find, at least with my students, they either already know what Kung Fu is about, or they're like looking for something that's like a little bit bigger than themselves, in a way of speaking, right? Because they see Kung Fu and they also see all these traditional aspects, and they see all these cool symbolic things, and they're like, oh, this is really cool. So most people, when they're coming to Kung Fu, they don't want to learn how to fight, or rather they're not there to learn how to fight. They may want to learn, but they're not there to learn it. But most people are looking for something bigger than themselves, something symbolic, something that they can enjoy for their life. Which, the more that we can introduce people in Kung Fu who are good fighters, I think great, because I'm all about martial arts keeping its teeth. It needs to keep its teeth. But it doesn't mean that that's what we need to be all the time, because we could be whatever for what anybody needs. If someone just needs a fitness instructor, we can be a fitness instructor. I can make you do push-ups. That's great. I can do that. If you want to learn how to be a better person, I'd love to help you do that. I love that stuff. But it's also important to keep the fighting intact as well.
Yeah, I was discussing with a good friend from Mexican family of Northern Shaolin, that is really difficult to speaking in the Brazilian reality. I don't know too much how other places are, but to like make good fighters in Kung Fu, because people that want to learn fighting, they go to other styles like Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, Muay Thai, MMA, and when they arrive there, they already are natural fighters, you know. And people that comes to us, they can be like good in fighting, but usually they are not natural fighters, and they don't want to learn fighting. So it's like a huge task, because how can I construct a fighter that is not a natural fighter and doesn't want to learn fighting? So it's really a challenge, I think. For us to keep and make survive the combat aspects of Kung Fu, it's really difficult, because we will have only a few students that we want get the really combat skills, you know.
Yeah, for sure.
And my question in this sense, since we are discussing this topic, it's what do you consider is the problem Kung Fu is facing? Do you consider this is the main problem?
Well, one of them for sure. Like, there's always the charlatans, of course, all the frauds out there that are ripping people off too. But one of the big things is that people, even learning the traditional martial arts, they either aren't there for fighting, so they're not going to make good representatives for fighting, of course, or they're being misled into thinking that forms is fighting. Like, I know so many schools that like will only teach forms, and then they'll be like, oh yeah, we can fight with you, but they've never sparred a day in their life. We can all see where that's going to go. You can see that, like, then people will, like, people who've never had their egos like checked, right? Because they never had the pressure tests. If you don't have the pressure tests, then your ego is going to get away from you. And then these people go to challenge MMA guys thinking, I can do it. I am a traditional martial arts fighter. And then they get rocked. And then they're another example of bad martial arts. And then we're wondering, like, oh, why is Kung Fu not very popular today? Because people can't get their egos in check when they have nothing to be egotistical about. And really all the ones who are fighting, their ego's in check because they've had themselves humbled. So they're not going like, oh, I'm gonna fight you because you insulted my lineage or whatever. They're chill, which is cool. At the same time, I also think that looking for a good thing either. A moral thing to do, I find at least. We should always be looking to cross-reference, cross styles, right? I mean, like, one of the best things that I did when I came back from full-time training to my hometown one time was I met Riley Boyer, a Southern Mantis guy, a Bakme guy, and a Taiji guy. Freaking, he knows stuff. He's really good. And like, I went like he had like not open challenge, but an open invite to like come hang out, drink tea, practice. And I'm like, heck yeah, man, I love that. And I didn't know if he was like really good. I didn't meet him up till that point. And I met him and I was like, oh, you're like really good. I dig it. And so we like spent the whole day just like cross-referencing and be like, hey, you do Southern Mantis, I do Northern Mantis. How are they the same? Because they look very different. But when we feel each other, it's like, this is kind of the same as this, right? I pluck in this way, you pluck in that way. It's essentially the same thing. It's just different expressions of the same thing. And then you can do the same thing with an MMA guy. They may have principles, and then we may have principles. And then you can be like, hey, you're actually not that different from me. And the way I see it is that all styles are essentially paths up a mountain. And the mountain is the thing that we're all trying to strive for. But essentially, we're all going to get to the top and then realize that we're all the same anyway. Yeah. It's not different mountains. It's the same mountain, and we all climb. The closer we get to the top, the more we realize that it's all the same as everything else, right?
And
so
another aspect that I always talk about is the guy can be good, but he's not an athlete, and he wants like challenge an athlete. It won't work. He can be really better in techniques, but he will lose. It's not possible. You have to be more or less the same fitness level if you are in a cage doing these fights. Otherwise, you are dead.
If you don't train to fight, you can't fight.
Yeah, and in this sense,
sorry to be, but train to fight, you can't. Martial forms are not an exception for that. You need to spar. You need to have that pressure test. You need to have that moment of chaos where things aren't going in the perfect scenario anymore. Because we can practice applications all day, and it's like, okay, I've learned how to do these applications really well in perfect scenario where the person is only giving me like moderate resistance at best. Well, like, what about an unwilling opponent? When you make that jump, it's going to be way different than you're used to, and you're not going to be able to deal with it if it's your first time. You need to have the moment of realizing that combat is chaos, and if you don't train chaos, you're not training combat. We need to be able to actually apply our things under duress rather than wishing for the best scenario every time, because we're not going to get that. Certainly not.
And in your opinion, how to keep traditional, the content traditional, the training traditional, but at the same time adapt to modern days and still make people interested?
I'm sorry, a little bit. You were breaking up a little bit for that.
Yeah. How to keep traditional, adapt the content, and make people interested at the same time, in your opinion?
That's a lot of things. So, in a sense, for like say adapting to maybe an MMA fight, everybody has their different sparring rules, right? If you're going to adapt to an MMA fight, practice to the rules, right? Because they have their rules. If you want to do it, and if you're going to practice traditional martial arts and say that you can do martial arts and fight people, need to fight, need to spar, need to actually throw hands. In our system, we introduce sparring and at first slowly and then speed up over time. Because if you go like full speed right away to beginners, they're going to rely on bad flinch habits, right? They're going to turtle up and do things that are not going to be conducive to fighting. So slow things down at first and as they're comfortable, raise the speed until eventually you're full out fighting. That way you're not relying on bad flinch habits, but then, you know, building yourself over time and then eventually able to handle full out. And as far as adapting, I think it really just has to be more getting back to the roots rather than adapting in a way, because traditional martial arts were built on styles that worked. The adaptation really comes in the idea of the traditional roots. Traditionally, you have to adapt to the situation. That's where so many different martial artists end up having so many different ideas and different styles were created, because they're just like, okay, I have these experiences and they're teaching me this, so I'm gonna create a style based on that, or a style happens based on that. It's all an experience. The more you experience, the more easy it is to adapt. And as far as like ground fighting, it's more popular now, but it wasn't completely new. In Chinese martial arts, monkey styles and dog boxing, they're all ground grapplers. A lot of their movements look acrobatic and don't make sense, but a lot of it was like leg locks and such, things that you see more popularly nowadays. But nowadays it's kind of lost because people are like, well, I learned forms, I didn't learn how to fight. So it's more understanding what it was that your martial art was trying to teach you, rather than trying to create a new thing. It's certainly a good thing to, like, say, practice other martial arts, get more perspectives, maybe incorporate it in your own personal life. But if you're going to practice a style, then I would say research the style, not just in like websites or anything, but like pick apart everything, pick it apart and try to understand its components, and then see what's there that maybe your teacher didn't tell you was there. My teacher had told me, like, there's an adage saying, I'll show you one corner, you show me the other three. The student was never meant to be only taught by the teacher. They're meant to teach themselves just as much. They're supposed to put themselves into the art. So if you say Kung Fu doesn't do grappling, then you'll be right if that's what your perspective is. But if you can be like, okay, how can I use this for grappling? My teacher actually had a ground system, like not system, but like a school of thought that was applied to our martial arts. And one of them was essentially taking our forms, lying on your back, doing the forms on your back. So this essentially being like, how can you use your techniques when you're on the ground, when you're grappling with somebody? It's all there, but we need to essentially find it again, because many styles have lost their fangs because of all the revolutions that caused a lot of arts to die and such. But yeah, and as far as getting ourselves known, well, we do a poor showing of, like we said, with our fighting stuff. Maybe we should pick ourselves up and up our game a little bit, or at the very least, appeal to the masses as long as it's not detrimenting the art. Appeal in the way that's like, okay, I need you guys to get in the door so that I can teach you what it's really about, you know? So like, give them what they want until you can give them what they need. So if somebody wants shiny things, give them shiny things to look at, and then be like, okay, come in, come learn from us, and then give them what they need over time. That's what I think.
I have 2 more questions. It's questions that I ask every people I interview. I consider 2 difficult ones. How do you see Kung Fu in 100 years?
That is a difficult one. I don't think it will all completely die. As much as like part of me is like, things are dying, I don't think it will all die. I think there will be enough of us to keep it going until eventually we can, you know, amass enough interest. Because like fads come and go, right? And they also come back again. I mean, vinyl records was a big thing, and then it was not, and now it's a big thing again. As long as we can prove that we have something of worth, I don't think we'll die. We may be few and far between, but never truly die. There'll always be somebody who's like, I know there's something to this, and I'll take it apart, and I'll find out what it is. So I think part of us will also evolve, because we have all these experiences with like Kung Fu not working in the ring because people do forms all day and think they can fight. So I think, like, I know many people like are trying to do a resurgence of like, hey, look, our stuff works, right? They show their good demonstrations and such. So I think we'll still be alive. I think we'll be maybe not thriving, but still making it through.
We hope so.
Yeah.
We are doing some efforts.
Right.
even recording interviews, right?
Exactly. Keep it going for the rest of the generations.
And the other topic is the last question I ask is usually, if you would give an advice for a people that is starting Kung Fu, what would you give? And another advice for advanced practitioner, even a Sifu, that wants to reach higher levels. What advice would you give to both of these people?
Okay. So to the person just starting, okay. This is going to kind of contradict because it's a yin yang, but it's not contradiction at the same time because yin yang. So one, be super open-minded. Let the teacher teach you. Because if you're unteachable, then you'll never get it. Even if it's the practitioner is really good that you're learning from, you'll never get it if your mind is not open. At the same time, question everything. Always be thinking about things. Never just be led blindly. Ask questions. Like, look outside of your school. Be like, okay, what is this person talking about? Never just blindly follow, because I mean, I've unfortunately been led by charlatans before in my younger years. It's what happens. It's, if you don't know what you're looking for, then anybody can be like, this is what you're looking for. And then it can just be total crap. So be open-minded, also question everything. And also don't limit your search to the local area. Go far and wide, whether looking online or flying places, go find other people. Most of the people that I know who are really good, like I met, is because I flew miles. Like I flew across continents. Go places. So that's what I would suggest to the beginner.
Just a commentary. I will totally agree, because I think, especially our generation, as I think we are more or less the same age, I think almost all people of our generation, just some really few lucky ones, that didn't learn a little bit from a crap thing. I think this, for our generation, this is almost every people.
Yeah, right.
Just some really few lucky ones that didn't have the this bad experience. But yeah, and this is offline is really good. And some people think that it is easier to go there and learn from a teacher and come back and stay teaching or practicing. But this is a discussion we must have, that it's really more difficult, not just about the financial things of going there, but you have to have so much discipline to stay focused and training. Because if you are in a gym, you have like your Sifu motivating you, that day you are not like, I don't want to train so much, but I'm here, and he will like, oh, practice, and you can reach something. But if you are alone, if you are far from your teacher, you the mind tries to create many excuses for not practicing, but you have to stick on, no, I will practice no matter what happened. I don't want practice today, but I will.
Absolutely. Always keep moving. Always keep going. When you find the plateaus, when you find the ditches, that keep going. They'll eventually end. They're suffering, but we need to let them go to understand that we can keep going further. As long as you keep going, then you'll keep growing.
And for the advanced guys, what would you advise?
Let go. Let go. People who think they know things, let go. Find someone who knows more. because there's always somebody who knows more. And if there's not somebody who knows more, there's things around you that know more. My one of my teachers, and one of the teachers that I met in seminars, George Shu, or Shu Goming, really one of the titans in martial arts today. He said that essentially he's reached the point where like he's now treading the new ground. He's reached kind of the peak. So he's like, I have to keep going. I need to find new inspirations because all my peers are either dead or lower than me. So I need to keep going. So look around you. One person may take inspiration from a tree. Another may take inspiration from a river. How can my martial arts be strong and solid like a tree? How can it be flowing and soft and fast as a river, right? You see all these like metaphors for these different concepts in martial arts, but it's because they're like, hey, I don't have a teacher around me right now, and I don't have students to learn from teaching, but I have this creek nearby. How can I make my martial arts more like that creek? And one of George Shu's ideas is become like smoke and also become like tiger. A lot of his movements are very reminiscent of a tiger. He doesn't look human when he moves. He looks like he's an animal that's stalking his prey. But when you touch him, he's so overwhelmingly powerful, but also you can't feel his structure. It's like smoke. You don't feel it. So you need to let go of our own egos in order to understand and train and learn from whatever is around us, whether it be teachers, whether it be from students by teaching them, we learn something new about ourselves, or from peers or from nature. Always stay learning. Always stay a student in your mind. Stay a forever student.
Yeah, this came to my mind a story that my friend told me. He's an experienced Tai Chi guy. He started really young, and he was like the youngest guys, like so. And his Shifu is very good. I know his Shifu, and he has learned it like 20 years from his Shifu. It's like there was no more content to learn. Like he was like the best of the group, and in the sense of everything, corporality, sets, everything. And he reached one point that his Shifu told him, "You are forbidden to come to class because I can't put you in a higher level. You should go out, don't look my movements anymore, and teach. And then you will develop better your Kung Fu, because here you won't learn anything new." And this is really true, because I think some people stay like 40 years in the same Kung training, and they don't develop their own Kung Fu family, like learning from teaching, learning how to express themselves, in Kung Fu.
Yeah, man. Like my teacher said that, like, I'll learn more from teaching than I ever will from him. And I was like, no, I don't think so. And then I started teaching, and I'm like, I can start to see where he'd say that now. I've learned so much from teaching my students. They're both like opportunities to like test my things as I'm demonstrating for them what to do, as well as it's a chance to look through all your foundations with your new brain. Because when you're a beginner, you're looking at it with your beginner brain. And then when you're an advanced practitioner, now you have this new perspective to look at your stuff from. You can be like, oh, hey, I didn't see this thing that was here before, but now I see it. Now I need to practice again. That's why you always come back to the foundations, and why teaching is so important. You're always working on your foundations, because there's always a new student to teach foundations to. And you go through that with the new perspective that you have, and you learn more things about it than you ever would have just practicing on your own.
Yeah, I agree. Another thing that it's really helpful for learning, and I see you do a lot, is making videos, like explanation videos, because you have to do a systematization of your teach. And sometimes this is like really clear when you are training, demonstrating, but when you have to put in a system, it's a totally different story, because even for Western mindset, I think sometimes we have like a really linear way of thinking. And I see Kung Fu not so linear. I think more like in a Taoist way, more it's not this but this, you know.
Yep. I actually look at it as a circle myself, because everything leads back into itself. So I learn my horse stance, and then I learn my techniques, then I learn my forms, then I learn to spar, and then I come back around. Okay, now I'm back at horse stance again, but I'm not just doing it just to strengthen my legs anymore. Now I'm doing it to develop root, and then I go back to my techniques, and then back to my punching, and then back to sparring, and then back to horse stance again. Okay, what does it have to teach me this time? It always works back on itself, which is why we have the yin yang, right? It always circles back to itself. We are always reviewing what we already know, but with a new perspective of all the things that we know now.
I agree. So I really would like to thank you about the interview. It was a really good time to discuss some things, special philosophy aspects that I usually don't discuss so much, because I'm more like combat, really combat. But I think it's a good source for combat. And,
yeah, thanks for having me on, man. I'm glad I could help.
And I will put, for people that are watching, your Kung Fu channel in the description, and
Awesome.
your media, so people can contact you, learn more about your Kung Fu background, the content you produce, or even learn my family Kung Fu. Why not?
Hey, I teach, so come on down.
Yeah. We are open to teach. We want students to learn how to fight. Thank you so much. People, don't forget to like and subscribe.